I was at Yosemite National Park, and I was staring up at Yosemite Falls, and I said to the ranger, "How tall is it?" And he said, 2,225 feet. And I said, "No, not above sea level. I mean, from the bottom to the top." And he said, 2,225 feet. He said, "But don't worry, you wouldn't feel much after the first bump." And I said, "Is there a trail to the top?" And he said, "Oh, sure," like he used to do it on his lunch hour. He said, "But you might have to post hole a little bit." And I said, "Oh, sure." Now, if you tell me something that you think I need to know, and my response to you is, "Oh, sure," you can be sure I have no idea what you're talking about. So I said, "How long is the trail?" He said, 3.5 miles. Well, I couldn't do it that day, but I came back to the park the next day. I got there about 1 o'clock. I parked in the parking lot at the trailhead, and I got changed in the car. I put on some wool socks and some running pants and some running shoes and a moisture-wicking short-sleeve T-shirt and a moisture-wicking long-sleeve T-shirt, and I had a lighter and my pocket knife and my driver's license, so they could identify my remains. And I went to the water spigot and I drank about a gallon of water because that's all the water I was taking with me. And I got ready to take my hike, and as I started, the first couple that I passed was an older couple, and they were coming down the hill. They had done their hike already. They'd clearly started at dawn. They looked disappointed that they had not run into Teddy Roosevelt or John Muir on the trail, and they had everything they had on was from Columbia or North Face or LL Bean. They had those baseball hats, but that have this stupid extra big bill, and then the flappy things in the back, and they had hydration packs, and they had vests with 1,000 pockets, and in those pockets were compressed bandages and Israeli quick clot solution and topographic maps and compasses and miniature solar panels so that they could heat their yurt that they had with them in another pocket. And then I'm sure that they had little baggies of their own waste, and the worst part was they had those poles, right? They were just coming at me. And as we passed each other, they looked at their watches and they looked at me, and I could see the scorn in their eyes. They were saying, "You're starting this trail way too late, young man." Now, I don't know that they were thinking young man, but I like to think that they were. And I got to where the trail starts, like where it actually starts. And here's what you have to understand. It's 225 feet from the bottom of the falls to the top of the falls. You have to actually climb 2,270 feet to get to the top, and then you have to descend a little bit to get right where you can see the falls. So you have to go, 2,270 feet. That's about half a mile. The start of the trail, the trailhead, is 1 mile from the top of the trail. So you have to go 5,280 feet to go 2,270 feet. But the trail is 3.5 miles long. So to go 2,270 feet, you have to go 5,280 feet, but it takes 18,500 feet. How can that be? Well, if you look at the topographic map of that trail, which I did 3 months after I hiked it, you will notice that the contour lines are as close together as the rings on your thumb, like the fingerprint. And it just looks like a little kid's drawing of electricity coming down the side of this mountain. It looks like the EKG of a patient suffering from an electrocardiogram, right? I mean, it's just this, it's not a trail. The word trail doesn't belong in the Yosemite Falls Trail, because it's not a trail, it's a ladder that goes into a spiral staircase that turns into one of those things you pull down from the attic, and then once you get closer to the top, it's just an ice-covered sliding board. That's all it is. So I was going up this trail. This is where they invented that horrible, horrible exercise called the mountain climber, right, where you have to get like in the push-up position and then do this, because that's what you're doing all the way up. And it's at this point, it's kind of wooded, so you can't really see anything, but that's okay because you can't see anything anyway, because you have to keep your eyes on the trail, which is simple because the trail is right here. But I was passing people coming up, people going down, and they were, they weren't dressed like the first people that I met either. They had on various stages of clothing. Like there was this one guy just standing in the middle of the path with a New York Nets tank top and cut off corduroys and no socks and a pair of boat shoes. And I swear he was saying, I didn't even know the A train went to Yosemite. And then there are people wearing jeans. There are people in what I like to call national park casual, which means they never intended to get out of the car. So I'm passing people, and then you get about, like a mile up, and it quits going straight up for a second, and it even goes down a little bit, which I didn't want to do because I didn't want to go back up. And then you come out through the trees, and you're halfway up the falls. You're about 100 yards, and the falls is just coming. It's amazing. There's just all this mist in the air, and it's blowing everywhere, and there's all these little rainbows, and you're looking right down the Yosemite Valley, and you can see Sentinel Rock and Half Dome, and it is absolutely incredible, and there's people up there sitting on rocks smoking cigarettes. It's amazing. And for most people, that's as far as they go. Most people go that first mile of that grueling trail, and they see this absolutely beautiful sight of this magnificent waterfall from halfway up. They think to themselves, I have accomplished something. This was nice. I am going to turn around and go back down to my car. Most people are satisfied with that, and they turn around. Most people are smarter than me. Because I thought, I'm going the rest of the way up this thing, right? And this is also, incidentally, where the snow line starts. Now, it wasn't snowing, but there was about 3 feet of snow on the ground for the rest of the trail. Now, not a lot of people continue from that point, but enough people had that they had packed the trail down. So you're walking in kind of a ditch. The snow comes up to maybe your knees or mid-thigh. And so I'm walking up the snow-covered trail, and it's just starting to get steeper and steeper and steeper. And as I'm going, on both sides of me, there were little holes in the snow, maybe like an inch in diameter. And there'd be 2 of them or 3 of them together, kind of in a group, maybe an inch, inch and a half apart. Sometimes there'd be 4, sometimes there'd be a 5th one that was a couple of inches away, and I was wondering, like you do when you're hiking, what is that? What makes those holes? Is this some sort of like California snow worm? Is it an Arctic clam? What would make? And then I slipped, and I went like that. And you people on the radio listening are never gonna know. So now I'm climbing up there, and I'm finally, here's part of my thinking. Sure, I didn't start till 1, but it was March, so the sun wasn't going to set till 6, so that's 5 hours. I figured that's plenty of time to hike this trail. But I like to hike, I like to jog. I can run almost any mile in any circumstances. If I'm properly outfitted, I can run a mile in 10 minutes, no problem. I can run 3 miles in 30 minutes, means I can run 3.5 miles in 35 minutes, right? It's how long, and I thought maybe some of this trail is going to be uphill. So I might have to walk some. But I can do a 15-minute mile walk, and so I thought, tops, it's going to take me, maybe an hour if I stop and look around to get all the way up this trail. It's going to take me 45 minutes to get down. That was my thinking, 2 hours max. I read later, when I looked at the topographic map, that you should plan half a day. So now, I'm just dragging myself up this ice-covered cliff. I'm finally, at that point, actually doing about 6 miles an hour, but it was treadmill miles because my feet were going like this. Came around a curve, and then you can see the trail going up the mountain. It's just carved out of the cliff in front of you. This trail was built by a human being, 3.5 miles long, between 1873 and 1877. It took 4 years to build a trail that's 3.5 miles long. That's 14 feet of progress a day. That's it. That's how brutal this trail is. So it's just carved out of the cliff. You can see it going up like a cross-section. And I told you there's snow on the trail, but some of that snow had melted. But it wasn't the snow on the top of the trail that had melted. It was the snow underneath. So I assumed there was rock and dirt and earth under me. But as I looked at that cross-section, as the sun reflected on the rocks heated up, the heat radiated up. So there were these ice bridges, these long arches, where the trail, the top of the trail, was like, maybe 6 inches thick, and then there was just 18 inches of space before. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. It was a neat little trick in nature, but I didn't want to walk on that. So I ran, and I got up there, And then I started thinking I should ask somebody how far it is to the top. But you can't ask just anybody. You got to find somebody that looks like they're about your fitness level. Otherwise, it's not going to make any sense. And that's when I realized I hadn't seen anybody coming up or going down for a long time. And I wondered if maybe I'd passed a sign that said, "Do not start this trail after 1 o'clock. You will die." And then finally I saw a guy coming down toward me. He looked about my age. He was about my size. I said, "How far to the top?" And he said, he was from Australia, I think. He said in an Australian accent, "You're going to need a torch mate." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Cheers." And we parted ways. And I was thinking, wow. That is the first time that I had been cheersed by an actual subject of Her Majesty the Queen. I mean, how often does that happen, you know? I was really, wow. And then I started thinking, he said I was going to need a torch. And I thought, clearly he doesn't understand. We're in California. You can't have an open flame in the woods. The whole place would just burn down, right? Thought that's stupid. And that reminded me of these two ladies I saw hiking in another part of the Sierras. They were in front of me, and there were these helicopters doing a grid pattern underneath of us, and the one lady said to the other lady, "What do you think's happening?" And the first lady said, "Either there's a fire, someone's hurt, or they found someone's illegal marijuana patch." And the second lady said, "Well, gosh, I hope somebody's hurt." But then I realized that what he meant by torch was a flashlight. And I giggled because I thought, I don't have a flashlight, right? Because he meant I was never going to make it up there before dark. But I thought, I don't care what that guy said. I'm going to go. So I kept going. And you get almost to the top, and it quits going unremittingly up. And it kind of plateaus a little bit. And I was walking across this beautiful snow tundra, and I realized there's not a single other footprint in this snow tundra. I must be in the wrong place. But I could see the peak, and then I found out what post holing is. And post holing is when you're walking along the snow and the surface tension breaks and your leg just sinks right in like you stepped into a post hole. But not just one leg, both of my legs went in. But don't worry, the snow was only like up to here. And it wasn't that hard to get my foot out because I was wearing tennis shoes instead of hiking boots. So I pulled myself out of that, and I post-holed the rest of the way, and I got to the peak. I'm standing there on the peak, and you can see the Yosemite Creek, and you can hear the falls, but you can't see it. And I was so disappointed. I was crushed. I'd come all this way to see. And then I remembered that the ranger told me you had to descend a little bit, and I could see, and I went down around this boulder, and you come around that boulder, and there you are. You're not 20 yards away from where the water's going over the edge. 2,500 gallons a second if you go in March, but it's California, so if you go in July, it's just a cliff. But there's 500 gallons of water going over every second. Of course, some of that is turning into mist, and that mist is in there, and the sunlight is coming through that, and there are 1 billion little rainbows just flying around up there, and then half the mist is blowing over. They've carved, probably the CCC, somebody with a lot of time, has carved steps out of the cliff face, and then like a 4x8 platform that they've put a steel railing around so you don't fall. Not that it would matter much after the first bump. And then there's a handrail that goes down that stairwell, and half of that mist had blown over. The bottom of the trail was 50 degrees. At the top of the trail, it was 20 degrees. So half of that mist had blown over, and it had frozen all over those hand railings and all over the stairs. So I had to hold that ice-covered hand railing and make my way down the ice-covered stairs. And I got down there, and I looked, and it was beautiful. And I have to tell you this, I stood up there for like 15 minutes, which is crazy, because my wife and I, we have different attitudes toward hiking, right? Like if I were to come, I can see you, so I'm going to point to you, and I said to you, "Sir, is there any good place to hike around here?" And you said, "Oh yes, there's a nice trail over there." And I understand I'm in a place called like the 3 Trails of America's best hiking zone in the world, Elkin. But then my wife's question would be to you, is there anything beautiful to see? What can I take pictures of? Could I get a good selfie? And my question to you would be, what is the record for doing the trail fastest? So we have these different attitudes. Her friends were coming out from Colorado to come and hike in West Virginia, Susie and this guy named Bales. And she said, "I'm going to hike with Susie, and you're going to hike with Bales. Bales is a lot like you." only less patient. I thought, wow, that's the nicest thing she could think to say about both of us. And so, but I'm standing over here, it was amazing, watching the water. I could see 2,225 feet below me, I could see my car. And I thought, it's crazy. It's 2,225 feet below me, but somehow it's 5,280 feet away, and yet somehow it's 18,500 feet away. And then I thought, oh yeah, I better go down before it's dark because my pants are frozen and I'm not wearing gloves. And so I pulled myself back up the stairs, and I got around the boulder, and I could see standing on the top of the mountain were these two guys, a guy about my age and a person who I assume was his son. It was a kid, and it kind of looked like, like a snowboarder kind of person with the long hair and, the kind of hippie grunge thing going on. And they looked disappointed. And I said, no. I said, you can't see it from here. I know you've come a long way, but you can't see it from here. You follow my post holes down there around that boulder. You can see it. And the kid looked at me in the eyes, and he said, thanks for the gnarly gratis data, dude. So I'm hiking down with that running in my head, It's beautiful. No one talks like that. And now I'm passing people that are coming up the mountain, and they're not going to make it up there before dark, but I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to look at them with scorn. I don't care. They can make their own bad decisions. They don't need me telling them it's a stupid idea. Like I passed these three guys in Minnesota Twins t-shirts and shorts and untied high tops, and there was no reason to tell them not, because you could tell them, look, stop, quit. 100 yards from here, they're going to set off 50,000 tons of TNT to start an avalanche to kill a fire-breathing dragon. And those three guys would have been like, oh, geez, don't want to miss that, right? So let them go. And then I passed this young couple, and there was no way I was going to tell them they weren't going to make it to the top before dark, because I could see by the expression on that man's face that he had been hearing that since they left the house. So I got to within a couple hundred yards of my car. And I was thinking to myself, did I hide the keys at the bottom, or did I lose the keys at the top? And there were two women in front of me, young women. They were speaking, I think it was French, I don't know. The only word I could make out was flippy flops, right? Like the footwear, flip flops. And they kept saying it, like they were having a discussion about whether they wished they had or they were glad that they hadn't worn flip-flops on the trail. And I thought, what a thing to take away. And I started thinking about John Muir. I'm sure you've heard it. You probably have the bumper sticker. It says, the mountains are calling and I must go. He wrote that after being up in those very same Sierra Mountains at Yosemite National Park. He was there in those mountains, and he came down and he wrote his sister Sarah, and he wrote to her, the mountains are calling and I must go. He wrote that about those very mountains, and I was thinking about that, and I love to hike. I love to be outside. I love to just be out there in nature doing stuff. I love the mountains. The mountains are calling. But I will tell you that at least temporarily, I have that number blocked. Thank you very much.